All right, so this week we are moving on to chapter 26, which is about fluid balance and electrolyte balance. We're also wrapping up the chapter on urinary, and that's because these overlap quite a bit. So the urinary system, not surprisingly, plays a big role in fluid balance and electrolyte balance. So we're going to do these together. So first, I want to remind you of the fluid compartments in the body. This is what we need to regulate in terms of when we're regulating fluid. Very important thing to regulate, especially the intracellular, which makes up about 40% of our body weight, is inside our cells. That's crazy. This is all inside our cells. This is interstitial fluid, and then the plasma is only 20% of the ECF, which is 20% of our body weight. So plasma is what the component of blood that when we think about regulating blood pressure, this is what we're regulating. It is so important to regulate this because it indirectly affects intracellular fluid through osmotic gradients. So if we have plasma go low volume, it's going to be higher osmolarity. We're going to be pulling fluid from the intracellular fluid because of osmotic gradients. We don't want to do that. We want to protect against that. We want to keep our cells round and happy and isoosmotic. So in addition to fluid, we also have to think about electrolytes. So having enough stuff inside compared to outside so that osmolarity is equal. Osmolarity is all the solutes, and it's made up of many different components. So in chapter 26, there's also the discussion of the regulation of specific components, because we care about osmolarity. We're going to talk about regulating osmolarity as a whole. We also care about regulating specific electrolytes. And you already know about ignore that, the function of some of these. So we know sodium. It is really important for action potentials and cardiac muscle and muscle firing. So it is high on the outside of cells and low on the inside. That gradient is so important. There is this drive. We have things like action potentials and co-transport that are driven by this gradient. Bicarbonate, this is a buffer. So you can see it's actually not that much greater on the outside of the cells than inside, but a little bit. We need to have it around. It buffers acids, very important. Potassium is important, and it is high inside the cells. So this is a little bit counterintuitive because we think about with the urinary system, secreting potassium is one of the main jobs of the urinary. And the reason for that is we need to be able to regulate extracellular potassium very well because it's low. We want potassium to be able to go inside the cells. It's in there, but what is outside, what's in this extracellular components, we need to be able to regulate and be able to secrete when there's extra. High potassium can cause real bad things with the heart and low potassium as well. So either one can be very dangerous. Hyperkalemia makes cells more excitable, but then eventually unable to repolarize. It's a bad thing for your heart and nerve and any muscle tissue. So we need to have that regulated as well. Calcium is another one we talked about before, more in the fall. So vesicle release, muscle contraction are two examples of things that rely on calcium levels being correct. They're a lot lower than the other ones, but we still got to regulate them. These are all regulated variables. Each specific electrolyte is a regulated variable. So is osmolarity, and so is fluid volume itself. So that's the topic of this week. You'll also kind of want to remember, again, this overlap with urinary, because the urinary system is one big component for getting rid of fluids or not, right? So for input of fluids, we've got drinking, we've got eating, and then some metabolism. For excreting fluids, we've got urine. That's a big one. It's like 60% of fluid output is our urinary system. Besides that, we've got sweat loss, we've got some respiratory loss, some feces, but this thing we can regulate that is just for regulation of fluids, like sweat, we want to be able to regulate that when we want to regulate temperature. The goal of sweating is regulating temperature, which is another regulating variable. The goal of regulating urinary output is to regulate fluid volume and sometimes osmolarity or electrolytes. So the last thing I want to do for this intro video is an overview of the hormones that we're going to be talking about. Some of these we've talked about already. Because we're talking about regulation of systems, we're obviously going to talk about hormones. So hormones produced by the kidney. What are some hormones produced by the kidney? See if you can name any. Well, we've got renin, you know that, right? Produced by the granular cells. We've talked about this already. This is going to stimulate aldosterone via angiotensin, our RAS system. Tensin. So renin is produced in the kidneys. We've got erythropoietin. You know this, right? What is this stimulated due to? Low oxygen. And EPO is a hormone that's going to do what? It's going to stimulate red blood cell production. Does that make sense? Yeah, we want to be able to carry more oxygen. Red blood cells are what carry oxygen in our blood. If we're detecting low oxygen, low partial pressure of oxygen, it probably means we don't have enough oxygen and we probably need some more red blood cells to be carrying oxygen. Let's make some, yeah, let's do that. This is actually a way of regulating blood volume as well, because those blood cells are part of the volume, but specifically responding to low oxygen. How about calcitrol? Regulating calcium levels. We haven't talked a lot about that. It, opposed to parathyroid hormone, it is going to be released in response to high calcium. So it is one I won't talk about more than that. But calcium regulation, it kind of emphasizes the importance of the kidney in that. So we've talked about renin. We've talked about EPO before. And here, I know if I told you before, it's produced by the kidney. It is. And now you know a little more about it. Then we have hormones that affect the kidney, so act on the kidney. Well, actually, look right there, aldosterone. So renin stimulates aldosterone, which is going to stimulate potassium secretion and sodium reabsorption in the distal convoluted tubule. We saw that last week. We saw it with blood pressure. We're going to look at it a little bit more this week. So we've kind of done it. We'll do it again. Then we've got parathyroid hormone. Talked about this last week as well. And also the distal convoluted tubule in terms of calcium reabsorption when calcium levels are low. Acts on the kidney to help us reabsorb calcium. Important thing to be able to regulate. We've done that. Antidiuretic hormone, ADH or vasopressin. We've talked about this. We will again. So this acts on the collecting duct to insert aquaporins for water reabsorption, and then therefore urine regulation of urine output. It's going to decrease urine output to have more ADH. In some cases, we might want to produce less ADH. So we'll see this in context again. Last one is let me spell this right. Natriuretic peptides. So we've actually learned one already. Atrial natriuretic peptide. Remember that? A peptide produced in the atria of the heart in response to high blood pressure that is going to act on the kidney to reduce GFR and therefore, increase GFR so we can have more urine output in response to that high blood pressure. Makes sense. We want to have that, right? So we've talked about all of these, some already. Ones we're going to see, the biggest this week are going to be, surprise, surprise, ones you've seen before, because this is blood pressure regulation, right? And a little bit of this. Again, that's blood pressure regulation. Like, that's what regulates fluid volume, blood pressure, fluid volume. We are going to see this a little bit. We're going to do some integrative at the end of this week, looking at some integrative learning outcomes that relate to calcium regulation, potassium regulation overall. So first half of this week, rest of these videos is going to be a little bit more aldosterone, ADH, AMP, then some big picture blood pressure osmolarity regulation. Then the second half is going to be a little bit about some specific electrolytes. A whole lot more you could look into there with regulation of like every single thing you might care to talk about, right? Potassium, calcium, pH is a big one we won't have quite enough time for to talk about how our bodies regulate that specific ion, right? Which is an overlapping but different system than regulating osmolarity as a whole, which incorporates all stuff, or regulating fluid volume, which is also related to osmolarity because fluid follows those solutes.